All right, welcome to another Bragging Rights. Today we're going to talk about a new army that I just finished. Finished is the wrong word. I brought it to its minimum viable force for 2 the strongest. I'm going to, of course, add more to it like all of my projects, but I like to showcase these when they're ready for the table. This army is a mix of Southern Italian forces with a few other special things. Now let's start with the special guy himself. So this right here is Cleonymus of Sparta. This guy was one of the sons of Cleonymus II, king of Sparta. And he's a guy who wanted to be king of Sparta, and he was not made for it. The Spartan people did not see him as suitable. I'm sure his family agreed with that. He had a reputation for being tyrannical, violent, but he did have a military reputation. So down the timeline a little bit, Tarentum reached out. Tarentum's in southern Italy, kind of in the arch of the boot. Tarentum reached out to Sparta and asked them to send some military aid. You know, the kind of legend has it that Tarentum was a colony, early colony of Sparta's. So Sparta said, yeah, sure, we're happy to help. And this is going to solve a problem for us too, because they want to essentially get this guy out of Sparta so that he's not causing problems with the succession. So they say, yeah, you can have Cleonymus. So they send over some money, and he starts raising a force. So there's like in Laconia, there's a city, and I'm struggling to remember the name of this one, but it's essentially like little more than a mercenary camp, but it's an area known to attract mercenaries from the Greek world, and especially from Lacedaemon. So he goes there, he spends a bunch of money, he raises a small force, and he gets some ships and heads over to southern Italy. He gets to Italy, and there the Tarentines, who have always fought in modified Greek style, so we have a few units of hoplites. They raise up an army of something like 20,000 troops, and he's brought over a couple thousand from Sparta. I've represented the ones that he brought over from Sparta with Magister Militum's Spartiates, and I really like this model. It's just a cute little chubby guy model, like kind of standard. Let me change the light a little. Kind of standard type of fare from Magister Militum. They tend to do little chubby boys, but I like the models. They're mono pose, mono sculpt, other than the command. And I've got this guy out in front who's actually from Magister Pendraken's old line. I don't think you can get him anymore, but I love that model. I did their cloaks 3 different shades of red because I just thought it looked a little cooler. I would explain this as kind of somebody gets their cloak 3 years ago, it's going to be a little more sun faded and worn than somebody who gets their cloak this year, and of course dyes would vary anyway. Cleonymus himself is made up of a command model and a couple of Spartans from Magister Militum's line, put on a bat base command base. And then the hoplites are from warprinters. I think it's Hannibal versus Rome. I think it's what the line is called. And it's got the Greek world and the Roman, specifically from Pyrrhus to Hannibal. That's kind of the range of actions that would have occurred in Italy. And it's pretty complete. It's nice. I did mix in here a few Roman troops. There's even a Carthaginian veteran and some Samnite and Etruscans as well, just to give it a little more Italian flair. They are light hoplites, so they don't have much in the way of armor. The folks who do have either chainmail or who have the kind of canvas armor that would have been typical of the period in leather, those guys are in the front rank fighting. So these are a couple units of hoplites raised by Tarentum. They also would have provided spearman-like troops, and in this case I went even further into the Italian range, and these are actually Etruscan troops that I form up, and I'm going to field as raw hoplites, as kind of allies of Tarentum. I went with a new color scheme for me, where I went with these pastel tones for all the cloth, and also for the body armor. And linothorax. Sorry, I was forgetting what it was called for a minute. It was bothering me. A lot of them have the distinctive, and I don't know if you can really see it that well in any of these models. Some of them have the distinctive chest plate armor as well, which is really cool, which is a very kind of typical Italian type thing for this time period. They also have the large kind of Scuda type shields, which, you know, I don't think a ton is known about the armies that would have fought in these conflicts with Italio city-states and the actual Oscan peoples and Etruscans. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, but this is more of an Etruscan unit. I just kind of want to mix it in. Anyways, he lands in Tarentum, immediately scares away the Lucani, who Tarentum had asked him to come and fight. They do get some tribes and specifically troops that join them from the Oscan peoples and likely from Lucani themselves. So in this case, I've got 3 small units, and I would field these as kind of javelin men or spearmen, again from warprinter's range. There's a little bit of a mix in here, but most of these are from their Samnite range, and you know, you can really tell because they all have, it's hard to see, but they all have that chest armor, like you really see it on that banner bearer, and then they almost all of them have feathers in their helmets as well. I tried to make them a little extra colorful, a little extra variety and shield design, just to kind of denote their non-uniform nature. So we would add some of those. He went with this army and actually took the city of Metapontum, which is a lot smaller than Tarentum, but you know, it's pretty nice for a guy who didn't have a lot of other avenues for power other than things like this, you know, taking over a city, because he certainly wasn't going to be a ruler of Sparta. So the Tarentines provided him with cavalry. So here we have from Warprinter, these are Greek cavalry. I think these could be mercenary cav, like in the Thessalian style, although the shields are a little bit later in period, but I think they look good at least. Our period right now, where Cleonymus would have been operating in around 300 BC. So shields were starting to be used by cavalry. We have Tarentine cav formed up in a larger formed unit of cavalry. So in this case, I don't mean Tarentine, this style of cavalry. In this case, I mean cavalry from the city of Tarentum, formed up in a large unit. This would not be a skirmishing unit. I used a mix of those Greek cavalry, Samnite cavalry, and Etruscan cavalry for these. And then we have a skirmishing unit of Tarentine cavalry that would have fought in the Tarentine skirmishing style with a shield and fought, you know, mostly harassing tactics till the enemy is weakened and then charge in for the kill. There's a mix of Samnite and Tarentine cavalry mixed together, and we got, you know, 2 guys who have these kind of Etruscan style helmets as well. And I'll field those as probably elite light cavalry. Non-elite light cavalry, we have kind of just standard Greek light cavalry. We've got like a Thessalian cap there. We've got some pelta shields. And, you know, Warprinter's really cool. I really like them. I did find that these particular prints were really rough to work with. About half of them broke just while I was trying to clean them up, because even the slightest bit of pressure would cause the whole thing to shatter and just fly into bits. Just kind of bad prints in general. But these are the ones that survived, so to the strongest, I guess. We have, you know, moving away from Warprinter for a moment, got some raw skirmishers. These are from Pendraken with 2 exceptions. We got a guy here and a guy here from New Line. New Line, not great sculpts in comparison to pretty much most of the manufacturers. Like the detail on the guy 2 from the left, you know, is just so much higher than the guy to the right of him. You know, if you look at that guy with a very small yellow shield, and there's a guy with a beard and a yellow and white shield to the left of him. It's just a much different level of detail. Now, of course, am I painting this detail for this close of a shot? No, I'm not. As you can see, no eyeballs and no highlights to speak of on the skin, no cloth patterns. But at this range, I think it works. Even at this range, though, you can tell those new lines lack detail. Right, and just kind of, especially the spears, just look like really weird lumpy logs. The equivalent unit of javelin men from warprinter, I'd contrast though, these have a huge amount of detail. I mean, look at the face of the guy 3 from the left. Like that's a 10mm model with pretty decent definition. Now the problem with these is the print job is not to the resolution I would prefer, because you can see definite lines on the shields, and really any flat area, you're going to see those print lines. That can get cleaned up with a higher resolution printer, which I'd like to do for the rest of this project. These are going to be fielded as Therophori, which not quite appropriate as a blanket statement for a Spartan army for this time period. However, I actually think it is somewhat appropriate for Greek mercenaries at 300 BC, and I think is plausible for troops raised in and around Tarentum. So we get 2 units of those. Therophori, you know, acting as light javelin men. You know, easy to include unit, light unit of archers. I used that same pastel color range I used in the Etruscans, and I really liked this combo of light green, light blue, and white. I'm going to use that more often in units. I sometimes use color to denote kind of nationality or alliance. Maybe this will just end up being an Etruscan color palette as I expand this army. But where were we? Cleonymus, where did he go next? He ended up thinking, hey, maybe I'll go take Sicily and go take Syracuse. Ended up being too large of a challenge. He didn't go there, but he did go to Corcyra, took over Corcyra. Okay. This is after getting, I believe, chased off by the Romans. That was really interesting for me to read about it. I know there's not much information on this, but the thought of Spartan hoplite style troops and a Greek army led by a Spartan fighting the Romans, other than Xanthippus, of course, that's really interesting to me, and I want to dig into that more. So I'm going to expand this army. I'm going to work with Magister Militum on this, but I'm going to expand this army to include a lot of Spartan troops, because I'd like to see some battles that are primarily Spartan hoplites, you know, the couple thousand he brought with him against the Romans. I think that's just really iconic looking armies that I don't typically think of as fighting each other, and this is a chance to do that fight. It's also a chance to do a few other things, like you get to fight against these light javelin themed armies. You also, if you assemble and expand the pool, Cleonymus later travels up the coast and kind of lives a pirate life and raids the Veneti at the northern end of the Adriatic. I think of them as a horse-loving, kind of Celtic adjacent peoples. They end up beating him and kind of scaring him off back to Corcyra. I'm not sure if it was just their numbers or their superiority in cavalry. There's almost no information about this. Like, you can read everything there is about Cleonymus, and it's about 5 pages. You know, there's not much out there, with the exception of it's a much better documented what he did with Pyrrhus later on with the siege of Sparta, but that's a lot later on past this time period, just another 20 years forward. I did some heroes for this model, for these things. They were just models I had left over, and I just made them heroes. I clipped up some bases so that they kind of looked like bat bases and fit in with that kind of jagged style. I need to do one mounted, but I'm actually out of horse troops. few other things. We got some light slingers, mixed in some red, light blue, and white there. So this wouldn't be Etruscan if I go with my kind of color themes. Then I have Cretan archers, and these Cretan archers, I wanted to reflect their kind of Doric influence, so I went with this deep red that I also used in the Spartans, and the Pylos helmets also kind of connect them to the Spartans, you know, with the overall look. And I'm probably, or almost certainly, going to field them in my Spartan army, because I'm going to expand this, as I said, not just so I can have a large Spartan contingent with in the army. I want to expand it so that sometimes I can just plain field it as a full devoted Spartan army. Actually, I really want to build it for the Spartan army for Leuctra, because I have the Theban forces already for Leuctra, which I want to expand what I have, but I have a really good start to that, and I certainly have a minimum kind of viable battle force. Some more commanders, and these are nameless at the moment because I don't know the names of anybody else involved other than Cleonymus. But we have a cavalry commander, an Etruscan command stand from Warprinter, and these are Warprinter as well, and a Samnite stand. And just each of these would control one wing, and then the hoplite wing would be controlled by Cleonymus in To the Strongest. And really, this can really only be used with To the Strongest for precise rules because they're on bat bases. Bat bases only work with grid system. However, I would still play Hail Caesar with this because it really doesn't bother me that you can't quite be precise about your measurements with bat bases. You can and you can't. You can measure from base to base, it's just that base is irregular on the outside. I think that's okay. I think for 10 millimeter, you already have to have a little bit of flexibility in measurements. I'm going to show one more thing and then talk just a little bit more about next steps and plans for this. So one of the features of To the Strongest, as many of you already know, is you need camps for your armies. And if you haven't checked out To the Strongest, you really should. Simon's like awesome. It puts out a really great rule set, very frequent updates. I've worked on a list for that game, as well as given a lot of feedback on the existing lists, and the speed at which they make changes that are positive changes to kind of tidy things up, clean things, add more factions is just astounding. And you pay once, and then you get this content every time it comes out. It's really great. It's a really great game with great founding principles. Anyways, you need camps for that game. So this time I went with a different camp style than I usually do. And usually I do a small camp which fits within a grid and allows you to fit another unit in that grid too. This time I went with a really big base that takes up almost the whole grid. What I did was I built up a little hill with cork on the back. I took some spackle, made a hill that a path that goes up around. I hit the whole thing with basing gel. In this case, it is I think it's dry earth, something like that. It's not the dark earth, which I typically use on other projects. I added these two guys from, I think it's Lancashire Miniatures. They're 10 millimeter range, and I think these are from that same range as well. These are kind of baggage. This tent is from Pendraken. It's a resin tent. They're not amazing, but they do the trick and they're cheap. This is a little dungeon decor bit from Pendraken, and in this case I filled it full of onions. I don't know if it really is recognizable onions, but it is once I tell you the red onions. And the reason I did that is I believe Greek hoplites and Greek mercenaries had a reputation for eating a lot of onions on campaign. I'm not sure I fully understand the reference, but I think it's as a root vegetable, it's easy to store, it's cheap, and they could bring it with them. I don't know a lot about the diet of these folks. Maybe somebody who does can leave a comment. But when I did the front of this and I kind of painted a trail with a lighter dry brush there, I kept the foliage really low. And the reason is because the units occupying the camp can just fit right on top and more or less from across the table blend in. Doesn't look jarring to have them on there. And they end up kind of being the same level as the rest of the guys. I thought the magnets would hold them in place a little because there's rare earth magnets on the bottom of all my bat bases. It doesn't really do anything. It doesn't hold them at all. but actually it pushes them away a little bit, but it does keep them, they will just stay up there on their own. They've got like a nice flat area to rest because all of this clump foliage is really low. This is maybe not the way I'm going to do all my camps because it's a little more time intensive, but it was very satisfying to put this together, and just kind of a fun little centerpiece for an army is doing something like that. I've done a couple other themed camps, but this one I put more time and effort into than some of the previous ones. So that is it. That's my army of Cleonymus of Sparta. Just kind of seems like an adventurer, maybe a little bit of a douchebag, certainly not somebody you would want to have a disagreement with, but really cool, unique gaming opportunities. You're able to have Italic type peoples mixed with Italia Greeks and Spartans all together in the same army, and they can fight against Gauls, you know, in the Veneti. They can fight against Samnites. They can fight against, he also took an Apulian city, so, you know, more Samnites or Oscan type peoples. And in this case, in Apulia, I believe some of those people also had a heavy Illyrian influence. So you'll have people with those kind of rectangular shields. You'll have people potentially with the sickle-like blades that the Illyrians used. Like, just really cool opportunities to have these little battles. Unfortunately and fortunately, there's really not much to go on from a historical standpoint. So you can just kind of make it up, you know? You can have these historically plausible battles. They're, of course, not going to be the types of battles you see on Alexander's campaigns of tens of thousands of troops. They're going to be much smaller actions, but you get to have combatants that you might not normally see, which I really appreciate. I also will be able to expand this same force to use as a generic Southern Italian force. I can expand it to an Alexander of Epirus force, who had a very similar story to Cleonymus. There's also, I've already forgotten his name, but there's another Spartan king who came over even prior to either of these two guys, and did the same basic thing. You know, the Tarentum asked him come over to fight the Lucanians, and he comes over. You know, there's some pretty cool and iconic battles too, like larger battles that would have been associated with these guys that you can fit in. If I want to, I can expand out and rebase my Pyrrhic forces here, or just kind of paint some new guys. This period is also this really weird period where there's transition of tactics, which adds to variety. In 300 BC, much of the Hellenistic world would be starting to use pikes, especially in the east. However, Sparta was still hardcore hoplite. You would have some in the west and some in the east moving to a thorough style shield, lighter armor, you know, a heavier dependence on lighter troops in general, different cavalry tactics. However, there's still many, like the Spartans, who are relying on tried and true. So you get to have these old versus new, which is pretty fun. And the game of To the Strongest is balanced enough so that, like, no matter what period it is, your troops inherently have a internal balance, so that, yeah, you can fight a little out of period and still have a great battle, which I really appreciate, because sometimes it's just more fun for groups of people to always feel like they're in it, you know, and they're in the battle and they can still stand a chance. The last thing I'll mention is this also gives me another excuse to build yet another Roman army, this time in the pre-Pyrrhic phase, right, where legions are in the quincunx formation, at least in the game of To the Strongest, where you have your Triarii, the Principes, and the Hastati all together on one giant base, which is cool, but at the same time, it's a little limiting because almost no games work like that. So it is very To the Strongest centric, and I really like to make sure as much as possible my models are appropriate for other games. However, for the stuff I'm putting on bat bases, I'm kind of resigned to just say I'm really only going to play To the Strongest and maybe a little bit of Hail Caesar with them, so that's okay. For those Romans, I actually have a lot of Old Glory that are sitting here that I think will paint up pretty quick. And instead of buying more Romans, which I really want to do because there's other ranges that I like better, I like to just use those because I have them. Why not get some of that lead painted up and on the table? So I've rambled on a lot here, but hope you have a great week, and try out To the Strongest if you haven't already. And if you have, and you're local to New England, let's get a game in. All right. Have a great one. Bye.